Well, well, well. I bid you good day from the current studio for the last time. Let me start over. I bid you good day for the last time from the current studio. Yes, it's a poignant day. It is a poignant day in our current abode, but we are really psyched about heading to a neat new place that is just about finished. Here is your Tuesday poll question on this 29th of July, 2025 at Smerconish.com. On balance, are President Trump's tariffs helping or hurting the American economy? With a hat tip to Bill Maher, who inspired today's poll question. Thank you to my friends at Parks Casino. I love music. I love seeing music live. I love the Excite Center at Parks Casino. What a great venue to go and see live entertainment. By the way, in a day like today, with a heat wave hitting the northeastern part of the country, hitting really the whole eastern seaboard, uh, get out of the hot air and go inside at Parks Casino and take advantage of upcoming live shows at the Excite Center. Aaron Lewis is coming at the end of the year, but the tickets are on sale. UB40 in September, just a few weeks away. Australian Pink Floyd, that 50th anniversary show. The Revivalists, that's roots rock with a modern twist. The tour is called All in the Family, 10 Years of Men Amongst Mountains. That title alone is intriguing enough to just want to go and see the show. Classic Rockers Kansas, the Psychedelic Furs with Gary Newman. Everclear, Sparkle and Fade 30th Anniversary Tour, Almost Queen, a tribute to, you guessed it. All of that excitement is upcoming. Bill Murray and Blood Brothers for one night only. That's in November. So go to Parks Casino, P-A-R-X, parkscasino.com. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Yesterday, 30,144 votes were cast. Kind of an in the weeds, inside political baseball kind of a question, so a healthy result. Should states ever engage in mid-decade redistricting? 85.23% said no, they should not. I pointed out yesterday, I thought I was clever in using the word ever. Should states ever engage in mid-decade redistricting? Obviously, I had the option of saying, should Texas be redistricting at this moment in time? I thought that would have drawn an outsized no response. So I thought I was being clever in saying, should they ever? Because what I was implying was, okay, if Texas does what it's contemplating doing, trying to gain a couple of House seats that could determine the balance of power in the new Congress, should California respond? That's what I meant with with ever. David Wasserman from the Cook Political Report was an excellent guest on yesterday's radio program. No one knows the subject of congressional districts like David. If you could ever put John King and David Wasserman in the same room at the same time, King with that encyclopedic knowledge of all the congressional districts in the country, as he evidences every election night. Really amazing work. And Wasserman speaking yesterday with such specificity about so many different areas of Texas. And I just had the impression he didn't need to consult notes when he was giving that briefing. And what I most learned from him is that there's really not an appropriate, politically speaking, appropriate Democratic response. If Texas does what it intends to do, redistrict now, and pick up 5 or so congressional seats, there's really not a Democratic response, no matter what Gavin Newsom says, because California, like a lot of blue states, has already had quote unquote redistricting reform. So it wouldn't be as easy as it will be in Texas. A really interesting issue. Maybe it's not going to be enough for Republicans to maintain control of the House, but that was the Monday poll question. So here we are on this Tuesday. And again, I'm asking, on balance, are President Trump's tariffs helping or hurting the American economy? I've done a wide reach, a lot of reading to try and just give you some contemporary thinking on this. So let me run through some headlines and cite my sources. By way of background, August 1 is Friday. Oh my gosh, this summer is just blowing by. August 1 is Friday. What's the relevance of that? That was the president's initial tariff deal deadline. Howard Lutnick said in the last 24 hours that they're going to meet the deadline. There won't be a negotiation of 200 different individual deals. There'll be blanket deals in many instances, but there will be no taco. There will be no Trump always chickening out. No more extensions on the tariff deadlines, according to what Howard Lutnick is saying. Quote, no extensions, no more grace periods. August 1, the tariffs are set. They'll go into effect. Of course, the big news this week from Scotland was the president striking an EU tariff deal between Trump and Ursula von der Leyen. Every time I see the first name Ursula, all I can think of is the James Bond movie. You remember that nickname? Won't say it now. The deal was for EU countries to have a 15% tariff on most imported goods from that bloc and includes EU commitments to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States and buy U.S. energy products. I saw a Washington Post headline just this morning talking about how this is a lopsided deal. Lopsided in favor of the United States by all accounts. Dateline Brussels, the tariff and spending accord announced Sunday by the United States and the European Union stands to avert a damaging trade war between two of the world's largest economies, but it is lopsided in favor of President Donald Trump's protectionist policies, with Brussels swallowing bitter concessions in the hopes of stabilizing a relationship that is vital not just economically, but also for security interests. Again, the poll question asks whether the U.S. economy is being made better or worse because of the president's tariff policies. Even if you don't like him, is he nevertheless succeeding in this regard? Again, Washington Post is telling you he just struck a deal where the distinct advantage is to the United States, the EU deal. And backing that up, I'm looking at page 1 of the New York Times today, above the fold, left side of the paper. A day after the European Union and United States struck a trade deal on Sunday, the French government came out swinging against the agreement, calling instead for tariff retaliation and warning that Europe would be politically weakened if it didn't hit back. Just further proof that the EU nations think Trump got the best of them. So where are we big picture? Now I go to CNBC. President Trump said that he'll likely implement a blanket tariff between 15 and 20% on imports to the United States from countries that have not negotiated separate agreements. So that's what he's saying. People are saying, well, he didn't negotiate 200 different deals. Trump is saying by Friday, everybody's going to probably be, unless there's an individual agreement, within the 15 to 20% range. Axios has a good analysis that I also read today saying the devil is in the details, and the details haven't been worked out. That despite what he has announced, some of it has been contradicted. I'll give you an example. The White House says aluminum, steel, and other metals imported from Europe would be subject to a 50% tariff, not the 15% agreed on in the deal Sunday. But the European Commission president said that metal levies still will be cut. Then there's Japan. Trump said the Japanese committed to investing $550 billion in America, with the U.S. keeping 90% of the profits, but Japan's top negotiator said that they will invest at most 2% of that sum. Then there's Vietnam. Trump announced a U.S.-Vietnam trade deal in which the nation would be subject to a tariff rate of 20%. Vietnamese officials have acknowledged the existence of a deal, but not those specific terms. The PBS analysis of all of this is that Trump is getting the world economy that he wants, but that there's a risk to stunted growth that could spoil his victory lap. I won't quote from it. You get the gist of what they're saying. And one more important piece, there's no accord yet having been reached with perhaps the most important trade partner, and that's China, which has definitely used the threat of retaliatory tariffs and withholding of exports of rare earth minerals that are desperately needed for electric vehicles. What's the latest with regard to China? The U.S. and China are talking this week in Stockholm, Sweden. Okay, so again, the poll question is, on balance, are President Trump's tariffs helping or hurting the American economy? Enter Bill Maher, who on his Club Random podcast yesterday talked about the tariffs and owned the fact that in his case, he had been too dismissive of Trump's plans and too negative in terms of where they would take us. Quote, just to take an example, these are Bill Maher's words, tariffs. Now, I remember that I, along with probably most people, were saying at the beginning, oh, by the 4th of July, the economy was going to be tanked. And I was like, well, that seems right to me. But that didn't happen. It could happen tomorrow. I'm just saying that's reality. So let's work first from the reality of that, not just I hate Donald Trump, because that's boring and doesn't get us anywhere and leads you to dishonesty. I have to stop right there and say, I saw how the first 50 or so voted on the poll question. And my thought is that the well is poisoned by people who, if you're asking me to agree with Donald Trump, I'm not doing it. So on a day like today, when there's a binary choice and I'm asking you, have his tariffs helped or hurt the United States? Many people just don't even want to hear it. And that's what Maher is addressing. And then he said, Bill Maher, the truth is, I don't know what his strategy is. But look, the stock market is at record highs. I also drive around. I don't see a country in a depression at all. I see people just out there living their lives. I would have thought, and I've got to own it, that these tariffs are going to effing sink the economy. By this time, they didn't. How do we deal with that fact? Because that's the fact. And I could run through the metrics of the stock market 2 days ago, additional record highs. And, I noticed that Trump critics don't want to give him credit for the robust nature of the stock market. But I know those same critics, if the market were tanking, would be blaming him. So if you'd be blaming him for a bad market, like what happened in April when he announced the tariffs, everybody blamed him, and appropriately so. If he was to blame in April, is he deserving of the credit now? I think that's a fair question. So there are the markets. And then you say to me, Michael, not everybody is in the markets. I totally get it. Okay, how about the labor market? We're essentially at full employment. 4.1, 4.2%. Again, you might not agree with this, but I think that if you wish to be gainfully employed, there's a job for you. Inflation, cured? No. Tamed? Yeah. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy, increased by 2.9% over the 12 months ending in June of 2025. And then there are interest rates, the bane of the existence of President Trump vis-a-vis Jerome Powell, somewhere between 4.25% and 4.5%. Not as bad as they had been, not as great as many of the mortgages held by a bunch of boomers who refuse to sell their houses because they're essentially living on 2% interest rates for whatever's left of a 30-year mortgage. But by and large, I agree with Bill Maher. By and large, I agree with Bill Maher. The worst case, I was nervous. I was nervous in April when the market was tanking. Damn right I was nervous. But those worst case projections didn't come out. So where are we on today's poll question relative to Trump and his tariffs? You could say he's doing what he said he was going to do in the campaign. He's protecting domestic industries. He's using leverage that we've always had with China and Mexico and the EU in a way that his predecessors have been unwilling to do. And, probably we were getting the short end of the stick, much like NATO countries weren't anteing up as they should have been. There's a national security rationale here that some tariffs are justified on a national security basis. And I think his policy with his base is delivering to them what he pledged, and they're pleased about it. Of course, there are downsides potentially. So relative to today's poll question, on balance, are the Trump tariffs helping or hurting the economy? You could cite consumer costs that have been borne out or still might be to come when these agreements are finalized. We still don't know the inflationary aspect of these tariffs. We still face a risk of retaliation. We have had and will continue to have supply chain disruption. And we don't know what the long-term prognosis will be. I mean, that's the best that I can do in trying to come up with a ledger sheet, old school of, draw a line down the middle. Here are the pluses and here are the minuses. On balance, I think the country, economically speaking, is in a decent position with one big exception. This is where I'm coming from, and that is the debt. the 36 or 37 trillion dollars in debt that we have. And Josh Hawley yesterday, the day before, introduced legislation seeking for there, and I'm sure this will have great appeal for Trump because he'll put his signature on the check, for there to be a rebate, like a tariff rebate. And every American taxpayer gets a couple of $100 with Trump's signature. That would be a huge mistake in my view. If there's any revenue on balance that has come from the tariff policy, it ought to be paid to the debt. But Trump is not debt adverse. I think he relies on his own experience in the real estate industry and figures, he declared bankruptcy a couple of times and debt's not a big deal. I think it's a great poll question. I hope you're psyched to vote on it. No, you don't get the choice of neither. You don't get that because that's no fun. On balance, are President Trump's tariffs helping or hurting the American economy? On balance, are his tariffs helping or hurting the American economy? I don't think heretofore they've hurt us. They did in the short term. I don't think you could say that at this moment in time they've hurt our standing. They might eventually, or they might not. As of this moment in time, I think advantage Trump, but that's not a long-term prognosis. Go vote at Smerconish.com on today's poll question. And please, after you vote, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe and set yourself up for notifications, okay? The next time you see me for a YouTube Live, I will be, well, actually, it's going to take a couple of days for the wiring to get right with the studio. The construction, the new studio, the construction is finished. The move is today and tomorrow. And then there'll probably be a couple of days of connection issues. Yeah, it's exciting. I don't want to tell you too much because I want to show you video later, okay? But next time from some, bunker that's in an undisclosed location, and then eventually in the new studio. See you, gang. Go vote.